An interesting backstory.
I think it's important that everybody knows about the Wizard of Oz.
A professional with decades of experience in her field.
I'm a psychotherapist who works pretty much exclusively with law enforcement officers, as well as other first responders.
Strong opinions and a definite point of view.
What people see on the streets, this job, is not normal.
Brutally honest and funny.
When I get a call in the middle of the night and they've been drinking beer, they're normally crying over a relationship. When they're drinking Jack, they get on the phone and they start off with, "Hey babe."
She identifies problems, probes, pokes, and makes you think.
So if something happens to your family, which is truly your biggest fear, and you haven't thought about every single potential of what could go wrong, then you feel like you failed.
She has her own special style.
You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Pick a side.
Welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels.
Hello and welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels. Today I am honored to have Yotam Dagan, who is doing this from Israel, bless his heart. So working out time changes was great, and an incredibly busy schedule on his part. And Yotam is a former Navy SEAL, actually commander, and is a certified psychologist with a expertise in stress reaction and hostage negotiation. And I'm going to let Yotam kind of go into details about more of his background, but one of the main reasons Yotam and I kind of got to cross paths back after the Boston bombing, that Yotam was actually in Boston at the time getting, I think, another master's degree. And I think for the good fortune of the Boston Police Department that you were there during the bombing so that you could help out, particularly with your background. And then over the years, you and I had crossed in many different venues and finally got to meet a couple of years ago when you were back stateside. But the work that you have done with post-traumatic stress disorder, you're choosing to still stay as a reserve in the military, and your brilliance, your positive attitude, and your being able to articulate this in your writing has been just so beneficial. And I wanted to get you on to be able to talk about a lot of the people that are watching this. We've got a nurse out of Oklahoma, but we have a lot of active and retired law enforcement officers that also watch the show. That probably 1 or 2 years ago, when did you write Operational Stress?
So I think it was published in September of 2019, okay. Which is not such a long time ago.
Yeah.
The idea behind this book is that, today everyone talks about resilience training and the importance of, the prevention of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. They talk about the wellness of the forces and the needs to make sure that the men and women who serve are cared for. And there is a perceived chasm between mission first or people first. And I don't believe that. I think that if you just kind of turn this on its head, making sure that, police officers, first responders, or for that matter, elite special forces, it doesn't really matter. Those people, as you all know, the need to excel, the need to get the mission done as best as possible is the number one priority. But since the job is so stressful, stress not only hurts our health, it also induces sometimes fatal mistakes. So by addressing decision-making and managing stress in order to be better professionally at what you do, we actually have a quote-unquote added value, which is, of course, is very important, of wellness. So it's kind of turning the equation on its head. And so doing the resilience training as part of one's professionality, as part of one's mission readiness and preparedness, and at the same time achieving wellness, achieving well-being, achieving job and better performance and job satisfaction. And that's why I wrote this book, and that's why I find it so important to kind of preach this idea. The U.S. government, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, with its Urban Area Security Initiative, has actually adopted this model in New Jersey, and we have already trained a few hundred trainers that are now spreading the word around within police departments, fire departments, and hospitals and EMS agencies.
Marvelous. Can you give like an overview of what that training looks like and what it is kind of core-wise that you're talking about? Okay,
so the idea started, I think, well, I've been doing it for nearly 20 years, but about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit less, I did some work with automobile accident investigators who are cops, who are police officers. And in Israel, they sit in their office and there's a fatal or, a bad car accident, and they're being called by their dispatch to go out there and do the inquiry. And they drive to the scene, usually getting some reports from the police officers and from the EMS. They start getting the picture of what's happening there. Sometimes that those accidents could be very, 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 very hard scenes. Their job is not to save lives. They have to do the forensic work, okay? So they get to a scene, usually sometimes minutes after the wounded are still there, maybe trapped in the car, dead bodies, all the bad things that many of us unfortunately experience. And they have to do a very, very, very accurate and professional job to see who passed the red light or who didn't stop to take the stop sign or whatever. And it turns out that among that specific those specific police officers, the burnout rate and the post-traumatic stress was so high. In Israel, they work alone. And so they would drive to the scene, they would do their job, they were highly stressful, go back to the office. Now they have to write a report, and in 2-3 months, they have to stand in court and testify, okay? And of course, they were cared for by the various resources that were there for them, within the police and outside the police, organizations like yours, Stephanie, like CopLine. But something was missing there. And so I was invited to provide resilience training. And resilience is something that we've been doing for a long time. And again, it's about mindfulness, and it's about breathing, the deep belly breathing. It's about, this whole issue of psychoeducation and understanding how stress affects us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what we found out was that if we take those various tools that most of us use, most of us know, we can be aware of it and not aware of it, but we use those tools of resilience in our day-to-day job. If we take those tools, we put them into a virtual toolbox, and then we take the operational cycle. Okay, it could be a 24-hour shift in the fire department. It could be a 12 or 14-hour shift in a hospital, and it could be a 14-hour or 24-hour shift for the police. We dissect the operational cycle, the shift, into an hour before it starts, an hour after it finishes, and then all the things that happen in between. You're sitting on alert, you're just doing some office work, and then you get a call, okay? So you get a call, your adrenaline starts going up, your heart rate, your pulse rate, and then how do you implement those very specific resilience tool into the operational cycle? We call it the Operational Stress Management Toolbox. We build it with each unit according to their unique operational setting and cycle, and it's different. And I did this with, Black Hawk, Israeli Air Force pilots who, they get called sometimes to evacuate wounded soldiers from the battlefield. And there are some very, very specific questions that they have to ask themselves. So you're flying this plane, this machine in the air, and you're flying south along the Mediterranean coast from Lebanon towards a hospital in Israel, and you have wounded soldiers in the back on stretchers being cared for by the physicians and the paramedics. And then two questions. One, do you look back and try to figure out what's going on the back of your plane when your mission is to fly as fast as possible to the hospital? Do you look to your right and see the beautiful sun setting on the Mediterranean, take a deep breath and remind yourself that there is life outside of this terrible situation that you're in right now? Do you control your breathing, or do you talk with your co-pilot in the cockpit? And what do you talk about? What do you convey? I mean, all those things which obviously have operational parts in them have also psychological and resilience-focused parts that needs to be incorporated into the operational cycle. So that's what operational cycle is all about. And we actually tailor this toolbox to every specific unit and every first responders or healthcare workers. And the beautiful part about it is that it works. Because, okay, so let's say that, let's take, so the automobile accident, the investigators, so before they enter the scene, we train them to do this internal talk of, okay, I'm going to get into the scene. I'm going to avoid looking at the faces of the dead bodies because that will distract me and it would not contribute anything to the work that I need to do. I'm going to tell myself that I'm a pro, that I know my trade, and I'm on top of it. And then I'm going to just do everything according to the protocol of work. And once it is over, I'm going to get out of the scene. And then when I drive back to my office, I'm going to stop for a cup of coffee and something sweet because I have to nourish my body and get some, physical resources that would lower my stress levels. And so that's the type of tools that are in the toolbox that we help craft with every special unit or highway patrol or SWAT teams. I'll give you another example, which I always like. So deep belly breathing is a very, very powerful way to lower stress because it's like hacking into our, sympathetic nervous system. And it's almost the only way that we can kind of lower, the blood pressure and heart rate. And when I work with children in the south of Israel that are sometimes being bombarded by rocket fire from the Gaza Strip, and I have to teach them how to do deep belly breathing. So I usually tell them, okay, so imagine that you are smelling a flower, inhaling through your nose, and then you hold the air inside for a second, and then you're blowing the candles on a birthday cake. Okay, so that's a very, very illustrated way of making this something that's engageable for a child. But when I work with a sniper on a SWAT team who has to be sometimes for hours on a roof of a building looking into a window in a hostage situation, and in that 1 second, that sniper will have to get out one round into the right place. Okay, with hostages around, you know the drill. And as you probably know, breathing is part of a sniper's, professionality, because when you inhale, the barrel, kind of gets down, and then when you exhale, it gets up, or maybe it works differently, never mind. And the thing is that using that language, okay, and talking about how important it is to inhale and to exhale as part of one's professionality, but at the same time, control your stress level. Because if you don't manage your own stress level, your stress manages you. And that could get you to put that one bullet into the wrong place, and that you don't want that to happen.
So in Israel, is this like a standard training that everybody gets? And I know that you're going to be big on empirical data with your background. What have we seen as far as suicide rates, heart attacks? Like, what is being actually tracked as far as success or what have you?
Okay, so with the Israeli National Police is about the size of NYPD, maybe a little bit smaller, like
about 36.
Somewhere between 30 to 40,000 police officers. And over the last 10 years or so, the organization that I work with has trained all of them. So
Perfect.
somewhere around 35,000 police officers who are trained with the operational stress management protocol.
Now, do they get that in the academy? Is it an in-service? And how long? Kind of help me understand the training.
So the training in itself, it started outside the academy, in service. I think it was 2017 was actually declared the resilience year, that everyone was supposed to get another kind of booster training for the resiliency. And for most of the units, it was like a 2 full days of training, one outdoor and one indoor. We use outdoor training. We don't use, death by PowerPoint is a very, very silent killer. It's experiential learning. I believe that I've managed to crack or to decode, the ability to bring very masculine, macho men to actually talk and to share some of their emotions. We create a safe setting. We, everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We don't, headquarters do not get informed of anything that is being said. And we try to, to invite them to share and to experience this new way of, one, peer support, which is hugely important, two, updating and again, building or crafting their own operational stress management toolbox, resilience toolbox. And we do that in a way that eventually helps them, again, become more professional. So the data that we have, and again, unfortunately, it's not public, but I've been working very, very closely with the head of the psychological services for the Israeli National Police. We know from surveys and we know from hard data that, one, there was a significant decrease in sick leave days, which is usually a very, very important indicator.
Cool.
The job satisfaction and the self-efficacy measures have gone up. And we have seen, and I can tell, again, it's classified, but I can just kind of talk openly and vaguely. So I think most of your audience have watched Fauda, right? The Netflix TV show about the undercover Israeli unit that works. Fauda, look it up if you haven't seen it. It's great. Fauda is an Arabic word for a mess or something like that. When bad things are happening, Fauda. So those units we've been working with, and I can tell you that the measure of operational competence and the bottom line of being better at doing what their core mission is, we've seen great advancement. And I do want to address your question. You did ask about suicide, so I want to say a few words about suicide and about the post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress in its whole. So Israel is different than the U.S. In terms of, it's a different culture. We're different. Israelis are different in so many ways. Our society is, I think, more, we're more open, we're more talkative, we like to speak about what's on our mind. We're blunt. Israelis are usually blunt. We use the term dugri. We talk dugri, which means to speak your mind, don't hold back. And most of our society has served in the mandatory military service. And that includes most of the people who then later join the force, the police forces, or the other, rescue organization and first responders. So basically,
As well as women, correct? Women
yes,
also serve, yeah.
men and women, yes.
Correct.
Men, women. Over the last, I think, 15, 20 years, more and more women are actually going into operational roles, which is great, I think. So we have, it's different. It's different. And I can tell you from military suicides, we'll talk about the police soon, military suicides. So imagine that we recruit, we enlist at 18 and we serve until we're 21 or 22 or 20, it depends. Women serve a little less, men serve a little more. And then you take those young adults who are, you take them out of their home, and you know what that means for your children to get out of home and to enlist. So it's very stressful. You put them into a very, very highly stressful situation in basic training in the military, and you give them guns. Okay, so as most psychologists or mental health professionals know, the peak of suicidality, the first peak in age, is between the age of 17 to 23. So put that on top of mandatory service, and you might get a perfect storm for suicide, for military suicide. And the fact is that in Israel, we have managed over the last 15, 20 years to lower the suicide rates within the military to way below the normal rates within most of the Western, Western culture and Western states, countries. And the reason for that, is twofold. One, we've been training our non-commissioned officers and very, very junior officers to be able to, we call them the gatekeepers. They to identify and intervene when they find someone who is in some kind of distress, and then refer them to the military psychologist, someone who I've been doing that for a few years back in the Israeli Navy, because to just, there's a lot of what we call reactive adjustment disorders, or people who just react to the change in setting, usually in the first weeks of their service. If you catch it on time, you intervene, you can usually prevent this from turning into a more full-blown depressive episode or something like that, which might lead to suicide. So that's one thing. The second thing within the police, so the Israeli...
I will quickly touch on, and would you then say that actually, once successfully done, actually now continues to build the resiliency because they have that experience that now they kind of put in their barrel that is positive to use?
Yeah. So one of the, today we talk a lot of not only about post-traumatic stress, we also talk about post-traumatic growth. And we know that
absolutely.
What doesn't kill you actually makes you stronger, right?
Exactly.
And so, and that part, okay, and that's what research shows, is that part, the post-traumatic growth side, is actually mediated by a few very, very important things. One of them is meaning and purpose. If service, okay, and knowing that you're serving a cause, and maybe we will talk in a few minutes about what's happening in the U.S. right now, with all the unrest and
Absolutely.
The police being caught in the middle. But when you serve, it's not a day job; it's a service, and it's something that you feel, that one feels that is important. That could mediate post-traumatic growth. The other parts of post-traumatic growth is bonding with the team, with the unit, with your brothers and sisters in arms. And the third, I believe, and I think research also verifies this, is being able to show compassion to other people. Okay, so and that might sound almost counterintuitive because you're a cop. You're supposed to, do your job and, catch the bad guys, etc. But the truth is, and I think every real law enforcement officer knows that, serving the community and, helping people, and I'm going to quote, helping people on their worst, sometimes their last day of their lives, you need to be compassionate and to show compassion. And part of burning out is what we call compassion fatigue. You're so burnt out, you're not able to feel what the other people that you're serving are feeling, and then you get alienated, then you get depressed, then you get burnt out, and then you might, someone might take their lives in their own hands. And that is why, a very, very important part of the operational stress management training is peer support and knowing that when you need to talk with someone, when you need to get something off your chest, so you could either talk to one of your colleagues, or you could call CopLine, or, get to the resources that are out there for you. But having that awareness and training in, not just in, counterterrorism or domestic violence or drug trafficking, training in conducting those sessions with your fellow police officers, which could be hugely helpful.
When you think about it, you're in your unit, but what do you do, during your waking hours? You communicate, and yet it's not what's taught. We spend far less time teaching about good communication skills than we do the other.
Exactly. And one of the things that I've developed is a very, very structured protocol of which actually resembles the critical incident stress debriefing that we sometimes use, as professionals with first responders, with military units, but on a one-on-one peer support,
Absolutely,
real talk protocol, which actually enables them to, ask the questions, just listen compassionately, not to give advice, not to try to fix anything like we love to do so much. And that in itself is very, very powerful. Now, again, remember, we try to weave that into the operational cycle. So when you get back from a call, which might have been a bad call in the sense that there were people killed or wounded, and so talk with your partners. So, the fire department, when they kind of get back on the rig to the firehouse and they roll the hoses and they refill, restock, whatever, they also talk with each other. And that one part of the what they do, they just do it.
Right. When you talk about, that the just listening. So one of the successes I think that CopLine has had is the teaching the retirees the active listening skills, the just being there, the non-judgmental, the not fixing it, the just being able to listen. And it's amazing how difficult of a skill it ends up being for those that are not trained in it. So when we take retired officers, 25, 35 years later, it's one of the unfortunate pieces that we find that we have to end up telling the volunteer that they're not going to be able to answer the lines because they really can't break from the giving advice and the judging. So being able to train that in is so important on so many different levels. And I'm wondering, while you're talking, what are the repercussions for an officer or for a soldier that says, I need to talk to somebody?
Okay, so first of all, I'm just going to go back for a minute to the compassion and empathy part and say two things that I think would be helpful. And maybe you want to reconsider your volunteer model. When you talk about retirees who are, in their 50s, 60s, I don't know, they're not very young usually, I believe. Right.
Sometimes older.
Yeah, and so the older. I always say the older I get, the better I was, right? It's this way of looking at one's past. You're looking back, the water doesn't seem to be that cold and everything was much easier. It comes with old age. And I think that that's why it's so important to teach those skills to younger people. And that's why it's being done on the job, while they're still young and more flexible. That's one. The second thing is that so that first responders, especially I think police officers, are very reluctant to speak with therapists. They're afraid to lose their badge and their gun.
Right.
Talking to a peer is a different thing, because they've been there, they've done that, and sometimes they don't even have to say it. It's just there. So, but sometimes we do need to reach out to another, to a peer, or to a psychologist, or to a social worker, or a therapist. And the problem is, again, stigma. Okay, afraid to lose a badge of gun, and the repercussions. Someone will hear about it, and I would, or even I'm looking at myself in the mirror, and I'm saying, what does that have to do with this, very macho and brave and hero that I am? And I think that part of our job, your job, you're doing a great job, Stephanie, in CopLine, and the other, the raising awareness part of your work, is to normalize it, to say, we're all human beings, and we all have our, hard times, and it's not just work. Sometimes issues at home and bills to pay, a wife, a husband, kids, college, whatever. Okay. Tuition and student loans, whatever it is, we need to take care of, and stress piles up. And so just talking about it, kind of giving it the right place, is very, very important. What I've seen is that for the most part, most of the guys, the men and women who eventually make that call, literally, the pun is intended. They make the call, and they pick up the phone, and they call CopLine, or they reach out, or they talk to a peer within their unit and say, man, I had a very, very, very bad day, and I want to talk about it. First of all, they usually feel much better right after it happens. And second, so some of them eventually end up needing therapy and taking a few sessions, and I've hardly seen cases in which someone came to me after the fact and said, I'm sorry I did this. Usually they're very grateful for the opportunity that was granted, and for the fact that they were brave enough, listen to me, brave enough, and read my lips, brave enough to say, okay, I have my vulnerability, and I can I can take it out for a minute and talk to someone and just get it off my chest. And what we know is that once that is being done, without advice being given or judgment, it actually recharges the emotional batteries, and it discharges the stress tremendously.
When I'm watching you speak to the audience, going brave enough, the audience needs to realize this man is talking, having been there, done that.
Exactly.
It's not somebody who is a psychologist that has sat, quite honestly, where I have, as a spectator, watching men like Yotam do what he does. So the credibility, the importance of being able to do that. I love the cultural piece. I love being able to talk about how Israelis are able to talk about stuff, and it is a different culture. And really what we can learn from a relatively young country, but the importance of that. And one of the things with CopLine, the reason why we had to use retired officers is because if we used younger active officers, that there becomes a conflict if an officer calls and is engaged in illegal activity or what have you. So, and the vetting process is pretty good at this point in time, but absolutely appreciate that. What's been, if nice is the proper word, which it's not, is that we have a lot of our officers that have been through the Los Angeles riots, have been through Chicago riots, so that when we've got the callers that are calling from our areas that have been involved in these things, it's nice to be able to have somebody on that other end. And I believe you don't even have to say anything. You can feel when you connect with somebody, when they get it.
Right.
And it's been really nice to be able to do that. And I absolutely agree. Most of our callers don't need a higher level of care. They need to be heard. They need to be able to just be heard. Cops are bright. They don't need advice. They know what to do. They just need to be able to speak the words. And
Be heard, be validated, to be witnessed sometimes, and to know that someone out there cares for them and can perfectly understand what they're going through, having been there, done that, in their shoes, in their boots, in their patrol cars. Yeah.
And so important, to as you keep kind of instilling that being able to be heard. Whereas with other hotline, without a fear of retaliatory action, without a fear that, my gosh, if I talk about, yes, I've thought of killing myself. Okay, where are you at now? Is that fear of, if I talk about that worst day, then I'm going to lose my gun, badge, and patch. As I was just saying here at the conference I'm at, it's one thing to call a hotline. Like, we don't ping the phone. We don't trace calls. You get to talk about whatever, because it's one thing to call a hotline. And the fear is, what's going to happen on the other end. And so that you're calling to reach out for help. Can you imagine if that help costs you your gun, badge, and patch? So it's being able to help people understand that it's perfectly normal, which is exactly what you're saying, to be able to talk about this stuff, to be able to talk about that shitty day, to be able to talk about what it's like to have no sleep and have kids at home doing virtual studies because of Corona. And you've now done your routine before you come in the house. You've stripped, you've taken your Clorox wipe, whatever it is that your routine has been. And now you go home and your wife or your husband's hair is out to here, because they're now being tasked with being a teacher as well. And then financial stressors that can be on top of that if the spouse is no longer working. So life gets in the way of life, and being able to have the skill set to be able to navigate it, survive it, and thrive in it is so important. And what you're talking about is just, it's simple and yet so rarely done, at least on our end. And that's why this is so important. I had talked about cutting down to like once a month or whatever. And I got some wonderful feedback saying, no, it's really beneficial to be able to, because people are looking forward to being able to see and talk about some of the stuff that doesn't get talked about. Mm-hmm. You had touched on being able to talk about kind of what's going on in the United States. And I would love to hear a perspective from both somebody who has studied in the US, somebody who certainly understands and trains here, and somebody who's got a really good level head on this. So go ahead, touch on whatever part you want, because a vast shit show in so many areas. So pick your show.
Okay, so the first thing I learned as a soldier in the military was that if you realize that you're about to walk into a landmine field, stop, don't enter it. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about politics, and I'm not going to talk about the larger context, which I think everyone knows of what's happening in the U.S. right now. I will say a few words about COVID because I think it's an accelerator of many, many things, and then I'll put on my hat, my crisis management expertise hat, and say something about what I understand that is happening right now in so many places around the world, and I will talk about the police and about the first responders. So we're a year now into the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's not that things were so bright and great before that, but everything has seemed to accelerate. And there's a reason for that. And so one of the things that we know from what happens to populations, to communities, to groups of people, regardless of culture, regardless of, around the world, everywhere, in catastrophes, in disaster situations, and in crisis situation, we know that when a crisis hits, okay, it's early February 2020, you hear about this mysterious virus in Wuhan, China. Where's Wuhan? Who has ever heard about this place? And everyone says, nah, nothing, and there are some warning signs, but we don't really know what they're all about. And then all of a sudden it hits. And sometimes in March 2020, we all get into quarantine, into lockdown. And we've seen the pictures of the body bags in the streets of New York City with the U.S. military trucks, not working fast enough to get them out. And everything shuts down. The economy shuts down. People lose their jobs, and we're in a crisis. And the first thing that happens on on a community level, if we look at the emotional side. What happened to us during those first weeks of the pandemic? We actually felt better. We got out to the balconies and clapped our hands, for the nurses and doctors and for the first responders. And we felt that we're in this together. And in April of 2020, some of us have actually bought plane tickets for our next vacation in August or in July, thinking that things will probably be back to normal. Well, it didn't happen. That's a spoiler. But then sometime during, the early summer, when after the first lockdown and the second lockdown, and it was, different in every place in the US and in Israel and in other places and in Europe, all of a sudden we started to understand that things are not going to be going back to normal so fast. I think in April, just a few weeks after the pandemic started, all of a sudden there was a very, very deep decline of the general, from an emotional high, what we call the honeymoon phase, feeling that we're in this together, and the heroic phase of we're going to beat the shit out of this pandemic. All of a sudden we got into what psychologists call the disillusionment phase. And the disillusionment phase is when everyone starts to feel, depressed, anxious, and and we're still there. Even now with the vaccine rollout starting, we're still very low. There are highs and lows. There are trigger events, but look what happens to us since April. Okay, so sometime during the spring, there was bad things happening. Riots started, and again, not going to go into this, but, from the Black Lives Matter to the Blue Lives Matter to, the various unrest in the US. The thing is, this did not happen by chance. The thing is that when we enter the disillusionment phase within a crisis, there's like a lot of potential energy that has to go kinetic, and that goes out, emotional energy goes out in the form of rage. And that rage is being tunneled by the media. It's being tunneled by various political, stakeholders who have an agenda. And if we go from Minneapolis to Capitol Hill and everything that happens in between, and I'm saying that on purpose because I don't want to take any side, and it doesn't really matter, because what does matter is that there's huge civil unrest, and who is caught in the crossfire?
Police.
The police, okay? Because the police is, the main mission is to keep the civil order, to make sure that everything is in place and that we don't start to literally eat each other and cannibalize. And that's the main mission. So the derivatives are to catch criminals and to, highway patrol or to do inquiries, into drug deals. But if you think about the essence of police work, making sure that the civil order stays in order, okay? And all of a sudden, that kind of disintegrates. And so while politicians, activists, name yours, pour, oil on that, the fire, on this inferno, the police is caught in the middle. And I've worked in the U.S. with police. I've been, Steph, you talked about the Boston Marathon bombing. I was very, very honored to work with the internal circles of that bombing, and
Absolutely.
the units that were in within this horrible event, and kind of debriefing and doing some crisis counseling with the higher ranks in the Boston Police Department. And I've worked in Chicago in 2015, doing resilience training with some, other organizations. But I got a glimpse of what was going on in the war zone of Chicago. And working now over the last few years in New Jersey, and being involved with NYPD with their peer support program since 2012, I know. I mean, I'm hearing, and I know that there's a lot of us out there who feel deserted, who feel, not cared for. And at the end of the day, this is kind of what's very important for me to say. All of us are going through a very, very hard time. And again, it's all accelerated by the pandemic. And to make it even worse, we're already starting to see the pandemic after the pandemic, which is going to be a mental health pandemic. It already is the perfect storm for, not just for cops, not just for first responders, for everyone. I believe that given the huge unmet need for everything that smells like support, therapy, etc., and I believe that there's just not enough resources out there, and I think that police officers, we're very lucky to have resources like CopLine and other organizations that are out there. And what I want to say is use them. Use them. Don't stay alone with the way that you're feeling, being chased by this end or that end, being, sometimes demonized by people who just don't get it, or they get it, but they have an agenda. And the easiest thing is to, kind of poke or take advantage of those who do not have a voice. And we do not have a voice because, when you're wearing uniform, you're just serving. And I want to say one thing, being a Navy SEAL in Israel, maybe it was 20 or something years back. And we were out there, chasing the bad guys, and eventually we were able to hit and to kill the arch terrorists who were actually sending the suicide bombers to explode in our cities. And then, the next day on television or on social media didn't exist then, but there were other outlets. They're demonizing you, saying, you're doing this and you're doing that, and you're a killer and a murderer, and they spin the picture around. And I remember that someone asked me, how does it feel for you, as one who's wearing uniform, to be so, degraded, demonized by your own media, And I remember thinking about it for a while and kind of taking a deep breath, and because it hurts. I know that it hurts. And I said, it is my job to risk my life and maybe to lose my life, and get that job done in order to keep our democracy going, and to enable you, a reporter, a media, whatever it is, to write whatever you want, or to screen whatever you want on me, because that's how democracy works. And I think that over the last year, we've seen how things could go awry in terms of Capitol Hill and everything, and we just need to remind ourselves how important our mission is. And sometimes we just need to take it to suck it up, in the sense of, we can't do anything to change it, but we have each other. and we can talk with each other, and we can use the resources, because there are people out there in CopLine like Stephanie who care for all of you and believe in all of you and know that this work is so important. And again, the meaning and purpose of this mission, of this sacred mission, I would even say, makes this worthwhile. And this, knowing this and acknowledging this, will help us grow out of this terrible situation that we're all engulfed in right now.
What you said, it touched me so much that I also want people to realize that this man sits in Israel, that you are being supported by a world, that those that understand the first responder mentality, the military importance, and sitting in Israel is a democracy, and the true understanding of what that means. It really touched me. But I think it's even more important that it touches our community, our first responder community, to let them know that they're just not being supported here in America, that there are people all over the world that get it, that not only are they not alone in the United States, but that we can reach out to other countries. And Israel is just a wealth to be able to do that. And Yotam, I'd love to be able to get information for you and for other organizations in Israel that can help our guys on their worst day to be able to realize that they're not alone. Because sometimes I think it's nice to actually talk to somebody like you that's sitting in another country, not necessarily you, but that truly gets, I'd say warriorhood, but it's not warriorhood in fighting. It's in a mentality of democracy, of being willing to fight for a greater cause, even when people don't understand and it doesn't ruminate with them how important that cause is. I remember talking to a friend of mine who's a retired lieutenant colonel, and we were talking about, it was after I think Fort Hood had just been attacked. And I said, I don't understand, don't we know where these terrorist organizations are? And he said, yes. And I said, well, why aren't we doing anything? And I'll never forget his comment because it hit me between the eyes. And he said, what part of the Constitution, Stephanie, would you like us to uphold? I was like, no. He said,
but I do want to touch on one of the very important remarks that you've made. First of all, cops, we understand each other, law enforcement, warriors, soldiers, we understand each other. We know, and it's between cultures and it's between countries, and there's great cooperation on so many levels between our nations, and that is very, very important because we need to learn from each other, and we need to, take whatever works and kind of hand it over. I feel so fortunate to have been doing this for so many years with the operational stress management model and with other things. I'm currently working on a mobile app that would actually help first responders and healthcare workers create a support network and to conduct real talk sessions with each other using the app. And again, one of the things that we've found working with the Israeli National Police is that once we started this type of training with the peer support and with the other operational stress management, the various tools, is that three things happen. One, sick leave days go down, job satisfaction go up, professionality goes up. But at the same time, awareness goes up, and those who need to call CopLine, those who need to go to the EAP programs, do it readily because the destigmatization of getting help. And that's why this is a joint thing that we're doing. And
it's a joint mission. It's a different mission, but it is truly in the mindset of those that serve and wear whatever uniform. It is a mission.
It is a mission. And so, I'm sure that, during the course of the next few months, we will continue this cooperation because there's so much to be done.
Absolutely.
and there's a lot that we need to do in order to, to care for our men and women who risk their lives on a daily basis to take care and to, care for us and to keep us alive.
I mean, on a personal level, and I think you know this, that when I have professionally needed, and at times personally needed, it has been such a blessing to be able to reach out to you. That being able to have somebody who gets it, but an even greater perspective of somebody who gets it, that lives in another country, that has really been conceived in crisis and continues to survive and thrive on some levels in a state of crisis, but has been able to figure out how to navigate those waters. That what a wealth of knowledge that, sitting here, what has COVID given us? A really amazing understanding of Zoom, of being able to sit back and say, I want to reach out to Yotam. I would love to have him on this program, and being able to sit here with you in Israel and being able to, there's this sense of peace that I don't get that often, that you have an amazing way of giving to others and to me. But this being able to breathe differently right now, saying, we've got somebody in Israel that has our backs, that gets this with us.
We have each other's back. That's the most important. Yes. We're in this together, and we should always cooperate and do good things for our great people in order to make sure that they, stay with us and
absolutely
good and yeah.
And there are so many people who want to corner the market, and there's nothing about cornering the market. There's all of this wealth of information that we are tasked to leave here on earth and make sure as many people have it when we take our last breath, and not hold on to it like it's sacred. We're just doing no service at that point in time. And that if in the true sense of being a giver, somebody who does this type of work, you have to leave it. You have to educate. You have to do it all and share it. And you have been such an amazing example to do that, whether it's through your writing, through your time, through all of that. And we will have many more conversations, because I do feel very strongly that what you personally have gone through and what the country has gone through is such a huge asset for what our country is going through right now, and being able to figure out some of the discriminatory pieces and being able to figure out how to mend bridges. Mm-hmm. And as you said, it's not about politics. Politics is a macro. We deal with the micro. We deal with those line people that are fighting this fight. We have no control over the macro. And that's what we need to be able to do, is we need to be able to get into those trenches and take care of those people that are there. So is there anything that I didn't ask? We didn't get around to talking about the other book, which I'm going to invite you back on. Is there anything else that you want to say? Anything that I didn't cover that you wanted to today?
I think you've covered. I think you steered this conversation in a very, very good and beneficial way. The headlines are there, and the urgent need and the important need to care for our service members. Uniformed, the police and the other organizations. And again, if there's one thing that I want to kind of maybe highlight one more time, is that, it goes back to the Old Testament, to the Bible, King Solomon, that actually said, if a man's heart is heavy, if the heaviness on a man's heart, and he speaks it out, he feels better. So speaking your mind is very, very important. And in another place in the scriptures, the same King Solomon quested for a listening heart. And that's the compassion piece, listening with your heart, not with your brain, not fixing, not giving advice. And again, to those who are listening to us or watching us right now, talk to a colleague, talk to a friend. Don't stay alone with the bad feelings that you have. And when you're listening to a friend who chooses to share something with you, just listen. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. Stay out of judgment. If you recognize the emotion, tag them, kind of echo what you've heard, but don't give advice. Don't try to fix anything. And that in itself is so important. And then if you see that the other person still needs help, you know where to send them. CopLine.
Oh, thank you. I mean, and again, and beyond that is just, culturally competent therapists that we can refer them to, that if they do need a higher level of care. It's just so important to make sure that they get into the right hands beyond those peers. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything that you have done in many countries, and that you continue to do.
Thank you.